But as far as long-term health consequences, artificial sweeteners are completely safe and have a very long history of safe use. You have to keep in mind the body of evidence that's out there, right? There's no randomized controlled trials, so there's no way of showing causality. So most people need a supplement. People tend to go on Amazon and purchase the cheap magnesium supplement. I'd say about 90% of the supplements, in the grocery store and maybe even online are magnesium oxide, which is very cheap to create, but it's not very well absorbed whatsoever. There's some new research that shows, the amino acids from pork, lean pork, not necessarily your sausage or bacon, but lean pork cuts tend to be better absorbed by the body than beef and some other proteins.
Welcome to the Performance Initiative Podcast.
Our goal is to provide you and ourselves with the tools to be the best versions of ourselves.
We are your hosts, Dr. Grant Cooper
and Dr. Zinovy Meyler. Well, we just wrapped up a conversation with Dr. Taylor Wallace.
Dr. Wallace is principal and CEO at the Think Healthy Group. He's an adjunct professor in the Department of Nutrition and Food Studies at George Mason University. He is the chief editor of the Journal of American College of Nutrition, nutrition section editor of the Annals of Medicine, editor of 6 academic textbooks, author of over 70 peer-reviewed manuscripts and book chapters. He is known as America's favorite food scientist. You may have caught him on the Dr. Oz show or any number of other shows. The Huffington Post called Dr. Taylor Wallace the nation's premier food and nutrition guru. He was but beyond all of that, he's a very knowledgeable guy. He is a very down-to-earth guy. He's a lot of fun to talk to, a wealth of information about nutrition, supplements, and all of the academic studies behind them. And he's really good about also being able to extrapolate from those studies. I took a lot from this conversation.
There's a lot. I mean, this is a very, very dense conversation in terms of the amount of useful tidbits that you can take away and apply right away and have a better understanding of where the needs are and what the implications of either deficits and what the positive effects of supplementation.
Right. Dense, but useful. I mean, we talked about diet sodas, supplements, Flavanols, green tea, all sorts of things. And I mean, personally, there are some things that I'm probably going to change based on our conversation. And I think everyone's going to have something that they can take away from this one.
Absolutely.
Enjoy. Taylor, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
We have a lot of questions that we wanted to ask you as America's favorite food scientist and an expert in nutrition. Usually, we try to start a conversation with sort of an open-ended question, your thoughts about Mediterranean diet or something like that, and then see where things go and then drill down. But we had so many questions that we had a little back and forth, and I was allowed to ask sort of a guilty question of mine, because I have a guilty pleasure, which is Diet Pepsi. And my question for you is, how bad is diet soda? And you're welcome to say that it's not bad. That'd be just fine.
And that will be my answer, is that it's not bad. Look, there's been a lot of confusion around artificial sweeteners in particular that really doesn't have any scientific merit. So when you look at diet beverages, you don't really see much of a detriment among, society. If there's any type of detriment, it would be the acidity of the beverage, can wear away at your tooth enamel. But as far as long-term health consequences, artificial sweeteners are completely safe and have a very long history of safe use.
This is my favorite conversation I've ever had.
Well, I think this was a successful conversation. We'll just end it right there.
So I guess the things that I hear about artificial sweeteners are things like, one, there was the association with cancer, but that I'm actually
the American Cancer Society, right? I think a lot of people are associating that with the fact that they have mentioned that there's a possibility of carcinogenic effect in humans, And although that's a very soft statement, that has a lot of people have kind of taken that and ran with it.
Okay, why don't we ask that one first?
Right. So when it comes to outcomes like cancer, you have to keep in mind the body of evidence that's out there, right? There's no randomized controlled trials, so there's no way of showing causality. When you look at rodent studies, which, we can dissect rodents and, take out their organs after we do a study. We can't do that with humans. We're limited ethically in some of our studies that we do. If you look at rodent studies, you really don't see any biological mechanism, at least standard across the board, that would um, suggest that, any type of artificial sweetener causes cancer. Now, just because something's not established doesn't mean it couldn't, right? Science develops every day. However, again, when you think of your main artificial sweeteners, aspartame, asulfame K, uh, others, there's been hundreds and hundreds of studies. Then when you look at, the one or two studies that do point in that direction, and those are rodent studies that were funded by certain groups that are very, anti-additive. They have they're making a lot of money off of their platform. Um, you really see those studies with really large biases. So, for instance, rats that are genetically um, predisposed to develop cancer. And, the other thing to keep in mind is what happens in a rodent is biologically less than 10% of the time what happens in humans. Dogs, are chocolate will kill dogs, but it won't humans. So you kind of have to take, the biology into perspective. When it comes to clinical trials, obviously we don't have, 1,000-person, 20-year long clinical studies to see if you'll develop cancer, but we do have some short term clinical studies that don't show effects on biomarkers of cancer. And so, things like inflammation, oxidative stress, we don't see any of that with uh, artificial sweetener consumption. Now, again, does that mean go drink 20 Diet Pepsis or diet beverages a day? No. You want to focus on, foods that are rich in nutrients and vitamins and minerals, that nourish our bodies and not necessarily empty calories or empty, foods that don't provide any nutrition. But, if you're drinking one or two diet sodas a day, there's really no reason to be concerned.
That is really nice news. The side of it that I was more concerned, because I agree, I had sort of looked at the cancer link in a similar fashion and the dose dependency and just all of the things that you mentioned. But the part that gives me a little more pause, and I'm looking to be dispelled of this pause, is the idea that it upsets that drinking artificial sweeteners might change the way that we release insulin and confuse the body in terms of the metabolism of sugars and how the body processes all of that. Is that something to be worried about, or is that a fallacy?
Right. So that's another emerging area of research, and there is some credibility to those studies. So we know that our taste buds extend down into our stomach. And when they have that sweetness sensation, that could, um, you know, uh, trigger an insulin response in the body. However, that insulin response is so tiny when you think about the context of diet. It might make a little bit of difference if you're type 2 diabetic, for instance, but in the normal healthy population, it's so small that it's a needle in a haystack.
I could have been drinking a diet soda while we had this conversation.
Well, actually, am drinking it.
All right.
That's
Well,
a
that's
good
great.
endorsement. Yeah.
Fantastic. All right. Can I ask another one then? Can we
Yeah,
can we just can we pivot to another?
Right.
Um,
We have a lot of pivots coming up.
we have a lot of pivots. Magnesium.
Mm.
Why is magnesium so important in the diet, and how much should we be getting, and how do we get it?
Right. So, one of my favorite topics, I've done a lot of research with magnesium lately. Magnesium is involved in over 600 enzymatic reactions in the body. So everything from muscle function, which includes, of course, your heart, blood pressure regulation, blood sugar regulation, all involved with magnesium. And in fact, early on in 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic came around, um, in April, I actually wrote a commentary to Journal of the American College of Nutrition that's been pretty highly cited that argued that COVID-19 um, severity and predisposal to catching COVID-19 was a magnesium insufficiency issue in subpart.
Hmm.
Because if you look at magnesium, it's involved in the regulation of your serum vitamin D levels, which we know low levels are correlated with contracting disease. It's very involved in immune system function and preventing inflammation in the body. It also is impossible to replete a person in potassium. You know, most critically ill COVID patients had um, hypokalemia. And so you cannot replete a person in potassium without first repleting them in magnesium. So all these electrolytes in the body kind of work hand in hand: magnesium, calcium, potassium, sodium, and others. So again, it's involved in a lot of functions in the body. And in fact, we're studying magnesium right now in competitive cyclists, and we're taking muscle biopsies and looking at the function of the mitochondria with high magnesium supplementation. Now, what's the issue with magnesium? About 50% of the population don't get enough, according to national surveys, which measure, you know, food intake and calculate nutrient intakes based upon the foods people report. Um, in addition, you know, the recommended intakes for magnesium are over 25 years old. There's a lot of new studies out there, and I very much advocate that our recommended levels might actually be too low, and that the national academies of medicine need to reevaluate magnesium in the future, because there is some really, really incredible data out there. So magnesium's involved in a lot. It's a shortfall nutrient in the U.S. population. It's involved in everything from inflammation to immune function to muscle health and certain aspects of brain health and neurotransmissions. So, you know, it's one of those things. You know, we see a large portion of the population, particularly older adults, those that are critically ill, that are hospitalized. Nobody seems to pay attention to magnesium, and it's a really important one to be aware of.
Those are terrific points. I honestly, I had not heard of it in relation to COVID the way you described the correlation with vitamin D.
Mhm.
Um, I'd heard, you know, that was pretty well established, but the idea, you know, but what you said about magnesium makes so much sense, and especially as it relates to vitamin D and everything else.
Right.
We
And
talked. Go ahead.
and if you think about it, where do you get magnesium? Dark green leafy vegetables, nuts and seeds, all those foods that the majority of Americans don't get enough of.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, you had mentioned two things that I actually wanted to ask you about. So, one of the things is, are there any studies that you are aware of that would look at the population and the prevalence of magnesium deficiency, if you will, in the population? Because that kind of will lead into the second question, which I may as well ask now, is routinely on your yearly physical, magnesium is not something that is drawn. The levels of magnesium is not something that is looked at. And if there is a prevalence of deficiency, should that be something that we should be looking at just as a preventative measure rather than trying to chase it when something goes wrong?
Right. So here's the issue. When it comes to clinically looking at magnesium status, the most commonly used marker is serum magnesium.
Mhm.
That magnesium is also homeostatically controlled. So the body controls magnesium levels. So just because your serum is at normal status doesn't mean that you're adequate. So we're actually looking at different types of markers like whole blood ionized magnesium, because there's magnesium in the whole blood. There's ionized magnesium. There's serum magnesium, which is bound to protein, but only the ionized can be used in the body. So there's a lot of different markers of magnesium status, but none are really reflective, or none are really good markers. So that's why it's not commonly measured. Now, if you're hospitalized and you are, in the ICU, it's really likely that you're really, really low in magnesium. So serum levels will show it. But for the average individual that might not be deficient, but they might be what we call insufficient or not getting enough. And that would cause over time a low grade chronic inflammation, which could lead to some of these, inflammatory related diseases like cancer over a long 20-year period. We don't really have a good way of detecting that. Nutrient intakes from food, those are, really under and over reported depending on the individual. Blood levels, serum or ionized, not really, great status markers. We are kind of arguing that ionized magnesium is a little bit better. And then there comes the issue of what constitutes deficiency. And that depends on which hospital you go to. And we just published a paper last year with some colleagues at the Center for Magnesium Education and Research and a global consortium of scientists in the field from 20 or so countries that argue that the lower reference interval for magnesium is too low. And we also argue that every hospital uses a different one. And we pinpoint what we think should be an adequate level. And so really we have no clue what defines deficiency. There was a study in the US back in the late 80s that basically assessed serum magnesium in a nationally representative sample of US adults. And they basically took the 5th percentile and the 95th percentile and said, if you were under the 5th percentile, that's deficiency. And if you're over it, that's, that was your confidence interval right there. So it wasn't based on disease endpoints. So what we've been doing is looking at individuals with type 2 diabetes, what's their status? Individuals with chronic kidney disease, what's their status? And trying to see if there's, a biomarker or health related condition that would be associated with a certain cutoff point so that we could adequately tell who is deficient and who is not.
Friends, we hope you're finding value in the content. If you're enjoying what you're watching, please consider hitting the like button, help us with our YouTube algorithm, consider subscribing to the channel, and turn on the notification button to stay up to date with everything going on in the channel. Do you think that that most people could get enough magnesium out of their diet, or should people be supplementing with magnesium? And is there a risk? Are there any dangers of taking too much magnesium?
Yeah. So in a perfect world, which in all practicality, I'm sitting here drinking a diet soda, like what you said, as a nutrition scientist. In a perfect world, sure, magnesium from food. You're eating your nuts and seeds and green vegetables all day. You should be able to get that requirement. Dairy is also a pretty good source of magnesium. But most Americans don't do that, right? You have pizza on Saturday night. You don't necessarily eat all your dark green leafies or incorporate a bunch of nuts into your diet. So most people need a supplement. And that's a really good question because people tend to go on Amazon and purchase the cheap magnesium supplement. I'd say about 90% of the supplements, in the grocery store and maybe even online are magnesium oxide, which is very cheap to create, but it's not very well absorbed whatsoever. So there are different magnesium salts, the organic salts and the inorganic salts. And the organic salts are better absorbed in the body. The exception is magnesium chloride is also fairly well absorbed. So mainstream supplements, glycinate, chloride, citrate, those types of magnesium tend to be better absorbed by the body, whereas oxide and some of your other more or inorganic forms are typically not absorbed very well by the body. So the supplement matters quite substantially.
And if, oh, sorry, no, go, you go.
So different salts, different magnesium salts. I know that there are a number of different recommendations that are floating around that, magnesium is implicated in headaches, or lack of magnesium and supplementing can help headaches. Some take it for better sleep quality, not necessarily
Spasms.
muscle spasms.
Yeah.
And for sleep quality, which is an interesting concept, not necessarily sleep onset, but actually quality of sleep and sleep staging. And the recommendations are of different magnesium salts. And so, do you find that? And of course, milk of magnesia is also magnesium, and we know what happens when we take that. Uh, so, how would you go about recommending? Would you separate those based on the specific ailments or specific things that people are looking to get out of the magnesium?
Or at the end of the day, is it just magnesium? And what's the
Right.
best way to get into your body?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, again, so you're not really, so toxicity in magnesium will cause GI issues. So, diarrhea, upset stomach, um, cramping of the stomach, that kind of stuff. That's only really seen with supplements, right? You're not going to get that from eating too many nuts, or maybe you will, but it won't be because of the magnesium. Um, and so the UL, or the upper level for magnesium supplements, is currently 350 milligrams a day for adults. Now, a lot of scientists, including myself, think that that number is not really correct, and that it needs to be readjusted. And I think most adults can tolerate, 500 milligrams or so of magnesium, particularly if it's the non-oxide magnesium. So yeah, you do see some side effects with that. I'm sorry, what was your other question?
Which of the salts? If does it matter
Oh,
which salt you use, not just organic or inorganic, but
I think what you're saying is that different studies have looked at using different salts for different problems. And
yeah.
is that right? And is that, or no,
well,
my miscarriage?
right? No, 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 absolutely. So some recommend different salts for different ailments, if you will, or different
Okay.
purposes. Sleep quality,
Right.
muscle spasms, etc.
Right. There's not really much behind that. So the magnesium salts are either, absorbed or they're not. So
Hmm.
some of them have better absorption than others. Ones like magnesium glycinate claim to be the only ones that cross the blood-brain barrier and have effects on migraines and stuff. That's not true. Other forms of magnesium will cross the blood-brain barrier, such as magnesium chloride. The Migraine Association does make some pretty bold statements about magnesium supplements for prevention of migraines, and there is substantial data behind that. When it comes to sleep, uh, there's not as much, research there, and sleep is a little bit more subjective, right? Because you can measure the amount of time people sleep, but it's really hard to assess quality of sleep in studies, and there's some new technologies that are improving that. Most of those studies are pretty old and pretty subjective between person and self-report. So I would say that's an emerging area of research, but much stronger data when it comes to migraines.
So for magnesium, it sounds like it's a fair way to think about it is that if you're taking supplements, if you aren't feeling GI side effects, you can kind of titrate to GI side effects to get the benefits out of the supplement. Is that right?
Well, I don't know if I'd say titrate until I,
Sorry,
that,
I mislooked that a little bit. I mean,
you know,
right, uh, the main side effect to worry about is with GI side effects. And if you're not having those, then if it's helping you, then you should feel comfortable taking it, is what it sounds like.
right. I mean, most people don't need more than, 2 to 300 milligrams of magnesium, in supplemental form. Uh, that would just take you beyond the recommended amounts and what would be needed for adequate health.
And
So
if people,
you're
yeah,
talking
if people were
600 milligrams to cause, GI effects.
right, which of the salts, in your opinion, would you lean more towards and recommending for people to look for?
So I usually lean towards citrate and chloride just because they're cheap, they're more available on the market. Glycinate and bisglycinate are also good options. They're a little more expensive. They're not necessarily as prevalent, like if you go into a CVS per se, but they're pretty prevalent on Amazon and third party vendors online. So, I mean, the main one to stay away from is oxide.
Okay, that's good to know. Other questions on magnesium? Can we
Um,
go to the next one?
let's go.
We go to the next one. Uh, Protein. If we can pivot to protein, how much protein should people be getting? And how should they be getting it, do you think?
Right. So, how much protein you should get depends on a number of factors. Obviously, people who are um, physically active, so if you're lifting weights at the gym or you're an athlete, you need your requirement is much higher. So, the typical what's accepted requirement of protein for adults is zero point 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. Um, Most people think that that's too low. Some of the new amino acid tracer studies indicate that that number is slightly low, and that it's the requirement is 1 to 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. I think that is what is endorsed by the American Strength and Conditioning Association. 1.2 for um, uh, uh, 1.2 grams for um, aerobic athletes and or endurance athletes, and 1 point, I think it was 3 or 4 for those who are lifting weights and trying
Trying
to
to build
build
muscle.
muscle. Then our protein requirements also increase as we age. So especially once you're past that age of 50, and your body starts breaking down muscle and bone, you need to have an adequate supply of amino acids for your body to utilize versus taking it out of your muscle and bones. So there's been some studies that actually show about 1.2 to 1.3 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight is more optimal in older adults. Obviously, pregnant women have a higher requirement, as well as young children, because they are they're building up their bodies.
Right. Yeah.
Basically.
Sure.
And what about what's your take on plant-based protein versus animal-based protein, if you will?
Yeah. So when it comes to plant-based proteins, I mean, look, societies, scientific societies, WHO organizations will tell you, you can get, adequate protein, if you're a vegetarian or vegan from plant-based sources. The sad reality is that's extremely difficult to do unless you are supplementing with a soy protein shake or two every day. It's almost impossible to get protein to adequate requirements from consuming chickpeas and lentils and other high protein containing plant foods that haven't been purified into kind of like a supplement or a protein powder form. So the other issue with plant-based proteins is that they aren't balanced in all essential amino acids. So if you're a vegetarian or a vegan, you have to really focus in on what we call complementary proteins. So, for example, wheat does not contain all the essential amino acids. Neither does peanut butter, but they do together. So they complement each other, and those are called complementary proteins. The exception is soy. Soy um, is a fairly balanced protein in regard to having all essential amino acids. Now, and so animal derived foods really have that balance of all essential amino acids. And even within the animal derived foods, there's some new research that shows, the amino acids from pork, lean pork, not necessarily your sausage or bacon, but lean pork cuts. Um, Tend to be better absorbed by the body than beef and some other proteins.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Interesting.
That's interesting.
And there seems to be also a difference in bioavailability of the protein, the plant-based protein and animal-based protein, right? The animal-based protein seems to be more bioavailable, even if you just go pound for pound or gram for gram, right?
Right. So plants also contain a lot of I guess, what we would call anti-nutrients. And we often think about the anti-nutrients like phytates and uh, as those that can bind and prevent minerals from being absorbed, like calcium and magnesium, but they also somewhat make protein a little bit harder to digest by the body. And then again, you have that issue of most plant based proteins not being complete proteins that are balanced in all essential amino acids. And keep in mind, I mean, plants have very little amounts of protein to begin with. So again, if you're not supplementing with a soy protein powder or shake that's been concentrated, it's really hard to get it from the diet if you're vegetarian or vegan.
How do you feel about protein shakes, about soy shakes or other kinds of protein?
Yeah, I mean, I work out about 4 days a week, and I take a whey protein shake after each of my workouts.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good. Uh, pivot, pivot. If we may pivot again. Um, there was one thing I wanted to ask actually, if we could just circle back to magnesium for half a second. Do you think that the magnesium requirements change as we age? Is that something that people should be thinking of that maybe they need more as they get older, or or is it just basically everyone should be looking to take a have a little more in their system than they do right now?
Oh, that's a good question. Our recommendations are based in healthy adults, and they're extrapolated down by body weight into kids. Um, and wow, that's a loaded question. Um,
Oh, I
I
didn't
would
mean
say, yeah, I would say there's not enough evidence to really answer that question.
good.
My gut feeling is that magnesium is so involved in regulating inflammation and oxidative stress in the body that because when you age, you naturally see more breakdown and inflammation, oxidative stress, that there might be somewhat of a higher requirement as we age, but I
Yeah.
don't believe, at least to my knowledge, there's any studies that support what I just said.
Okay.
That's
That
that's a logical extrapolation,
yeah,
though.
100%.
Yeah.
And then I think it's good for people to realize that there's a lot of stuff like that where you have to extrapolate and you have to take your best educated guess because the studies, I like we always say to our colleagues, right? You need to know what we know and then know that that ends somewhere and know where that line is, but not be afraid to use common sense to take it forward a little bit.
Right. It's very hard to make public recommendations because on one side, you want to be evidence based and you don't want to promise people too much. But on the other side, you know, we're not going to have a randomized control trial for everything.
Right.
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 And sometimes we get paralyzed by lack of evidence and lack of advice, and that at that time is
Yeah.
counterproductive.
Yeah. 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 Okay. Something that I know that you care a lot about, and we all should, is bone health. And I guess the question is, how should we think about bone health and nutrition and maybe supplementation and how that changes as we age, just like we were just talking about? How should we think about that?
Well, most people don't think of bone as a living tissue, but bone, like all the other tissues in your body, is a living tissue that is constantly rebuilding and remodeling. Um, what people don't realize is that you reach what's called peak bone mass, or the maximum uh, mass and strength of your bones before age 30. For most people, it's by age 25. It differs by site. I believe that the hip in women develop by age 19, 20 years old. And so think of your bones as a nutrition savings account. And so it's kind of like a retirement account. Like before you're 30, you're putting as much as you can into there and building up that retirement account as much as you can. Then from the age of like 30 to 50, you're really trying to just maintain. And then after 50, you start taking out of that retirement savings plan, that menopause stage for women, and then a little bit older in men, you start taking away from those reserves. And so, really early life nutrition has been shown, just a 5% change in peak bone mass in younger adults can equate to 25 to 50% reduction in hip fractures later in life. So some small changes in early
That's
life
dramatic.
really affect, late life health.
Wow. And when you talk about the actual nutrition that's involved with that, are we thinking mostly about calcium and vitamin D? Is there more to it than that?
Well, now
Oh,
we know magnesium as well.
And magnesium.
yeah, yeah.
Which
Well,
is magnesium and Diet Pepsi all the way.
right. So calcium is the dominant mineral in bone, in the hydroxyapatite crystal. Uh, Protein, actually, if you put a bone in acid, you'll get a gel, because the calcium and other minerals in bone are held together by protein, in the bone. So protein, very important for bone as well. And then you've got, of course, magnesium. About 50% of the magnesium in your body resides in the bone. And here's where calcium and magnesium get to be a concern with bone. Um, when your body is deplete in calcium or magnesium from the diet, it begins to pull it from the bone, because both nutrients are involved in other physiological functions like, your heart function, muscle function, brain functions, nerve transmissions. So your body will pull it from the bones, and that weakens them and causes osteoporosis. Vitamin D is very important because vitamin D helps you absorb calcium from the gut, and it also puts calcium into the bone. The vitamin D in that manner is hormonal like. Um, there are several other nutrients, like vitamin C, that are involved in, collagen synthesis, which collagen is a major protein in bone. There are some new studies showing vitamin K helps the proteins in bone, restructure and build up bone, um, and get calcium into the bone. Uh, Weaker evidence there. So yeah, your dominant minerals are calcium, magnesium, and then of course we know biologically vitamin D is important. But there are several other nutrients, and I should say protein is very important as well. But there's several other nutrients that really have emerging evidence that they're important, and it makes sense, right? Because bone is like every other tissue; it needs adequate nutrition, so all the
Yeah.
vitamins and minerals to function properly.
Mhm.
Do you think that most people should be looking to get these nutrients through their diet, or is this something that people should be looking to supplement for?
Well, again, it depends on your individual diet. Like, we all know that person that, is like the super nutrition person that, hasn't had a cookie in 20 years. Um, but for the majority of us, especially this time of the year, that's, not really practical. I mean, I'm going to have my glass of wine, or, at my Christmas party, and I'm going to eat pizza on the weekends with my friends. And, you know, when I go to Christmas parties, I'm going to have dessert and all that stuff. I
Sure.
choose to supplement. I'm probably a little bit more liberal with supplements than most. Uh, Other nutrition scientists. I'm the editor in chief of the Journal of Dietary Supplements, and I actually supplement quite extensively in my diet. And I live a pretty healthy lifestyle. I typically try to eat right Monday through Friday, and then I kind of do whatever I want to on the weekend. But I still take a multivitamin, vitamin D. Um, I actually have invested in, there are several companies online that will either genetically test you, or you can send them your 23andMe, and they will tell you, for instance, I'm predisposed to having low blood vitamin E levels. So I supplement with vitamin E. And so I take several supplements, based upon my own personalized genetics and family history of disease, and, my own, knowledge of my eating patterns.
That's I had heard about companies that were looking to do that, but I wasn't aware that that was actually. I mean, I guess there was the famously Dana White did some kind of personalized blood
Right.
score and then supplemented from that. Could you talk more about the company that you just described? I'm really curious about that.
Yeah, well, there are several ones out there. I'm on a science advisory board for a company called Ahara, Ahara. It's ahara.com. And basically, my good friend Melina developed this company. I'm on her science advisory board. And the idea was that we take your own personal health records. And then we can genetically test you to look at, do you have mutations in certain genes that, regulate blood choline, levels, or, vitamin D levels, or whatnot. And then you can take, look at your own food records, online, or you can input your own food records online, and you can take a look at what you're getting from the diet. We recommend, different types of foods for you to incorporate in your diet. And then, supplementation when appropriate. So it's a real food first approach, which I appreciate. But it also, kind of throws in like, hey, I'm really genetically predisposed to have low vitamin E, which is really important for a number of things like, the antioxidant capacity. Actually, I'm low in vitamin E and CoQ10, which I was really surprised about. Both are very much involved in our body's antioxidant balance. So I supplement with both of those too now.
Wow,
So,
that really seems like the future of medicine, right? It's
yeah,
I think we're probably that's really the vanguard of things, and
Right,
it'll
individualized medicine and
yeah,
looking at the genetics and the predispositions. If you were to take, and that certainly is the best way, is to there's no real umbrella to say everyone should do X. But having said that, if you were
having
to
said that.
say, if you were to say, let's say someone who is not doesn't have access to that right now, what would your prescription be of what are the essential things that someone looking to improve their bone health preventatively? Would you say K2? Would you say vitamin D3? What would you say are the essential things to supplement with?
right. So vitamin D2 and D3, there's not much difference. I mean, they say D3 is the more biological form, but your body converts D2 fairly easy to D3. Um, when it comes to supplementation, again, it depends on your diet. So if you're consuming 3 glasses of milk per day or 3 servings of dairy per day, you don't really need a calcium supplement. If you're eating, your dark green leafy vegetables or your nuts and seeds, you don't really need a magnesium supplement. Uh, for myself, I probably get, a serving or two of dairy a day. And I consume a lot of fortified foods. My whey protein shake has a lot of calcium in it. I don't choose to supplement with calcium because I'm pretty close to that level myself. When it comes to magnesium, I don't always, get the seeds and dark green leafies in all the time, especially having a 6-year-old around that only wants to eat French fries and chicken nuggets. So, I supplement with 200 milligrams of magnesium chloride. That's just me. So, it is a very personalized nutrition approach. And that's one of the things I've been really excited about working with Ahara is that it's a real personalized nutrition approach that I think I think it's really going to catch on and be something big.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. But for let's say for someone who's let's say 60 years old, right? Would you at that point would you recommend? And I realize that their personal approach is very important, um, but without their ability to access that, would you say K2 or vitamin K in any form? Would you add that to the mix?
Gosh, K2 is a tricky one. There's been a couple large studies that show that it has an effect, and a couple of large studies that show that it doesn't have an effect. Now, the nice thing about menaquinone, I believe it's menaquinone 7, MK7, that people supplement with, it doesn't have any, it doesn't contribute to blood clotting effects. So you're not going to, counter your warfarin or, as with, vitamin K1 supplements. You're not going to counter blood thinners and things like that with
Yeah.
vitamin K2, or at least most forms of vitamin K2. Um, but again, the jury's kind of still out whether, it biologically it makes sense. But it's not showing much in clinical trials. But keep in mind, clinical trials in the bone field are hard because it takes at least 6 months to a year for bone mineral density to change. And then you're talking about incremental changes with each component of nutrition. So, that's really hard to assess because you have to really keep people compliant for a long period of time to show changes. So just because you're not necessarily showing changes in a clinical trial, I mean, keeping people compliant for, 4 week studies is challenging enough, much less 6 months to a year.
Yeah. Is it possible to over supplement with calcium? So something that we heard about is the risk of cardiovascular side effects with too much calcium. Is that something to be concerned about?
No, not at all. In fact, there's a lot of epidemiology that gets confounded, and this is an example of an epidemiological confound that doesn't really occur in real life. So, for example, and I've written extensively about this in the scientific literature. Um, when you consume calcium, one, your body can only absorb a maximum of 600 milligrams per day. That's if you're not taking it with anything else, because it also competes with magnesium, zinc, and iron and other nutrients for absorption. So if you're supplementing with like a 1200 milligram, everything you need in one day supplement, just know that half of that at least is coming out the other end and not being
Sure.
absorbed. So that for one. Two, there's no biological mechanism by which calcium uh, could increase your risk of vascular disease. Now, when there's a lot of inflammation in the body, we do see atherosclerosis. And at the end stage of that, there is calcification of the arteries that are injured. That happens regardless of calcium intake. And if you look at calcified arteries, they're actually more stable than those plaque rich arteries, which tend to break off and cause blood clots and, strokes and things like that. So the short answer is no, there's really no risk of cardiovascular issues with high levels of calcium supplementation. And even when it comes to kidney disease, there was a small 1 in 373 individuals had an elevated risk of kidney stones in the Women's Health Initiative that was published in the early 2000s. Um, and what they basically showed, a reanalysis of that randomized control trial, showed that individuals, when it was unblinded, individuals who took calcium supplements that were also on the treatment, uh, so they were getting double the calcium, didn't have any increased risk of kidney stones or cardiovascular events. And then, individuals who adhered to the treatment, 80% or more didn't have those risks. So usually biology says, if a little bit is bad for you, then a lot is really bad for you. And we don't see that when it comes to the clinical trial data.
That's good news. Could it be because you're not there's a is it possible that you lose that dose dependent relationship because you can only absorb so much? With that, is that a counterpoint to that, or I don't know.
No, what I wonder with the calcium supplement, because it really only again shows up in epidemiology, you don't see it in clinical trials. What I
Okay.
wonder is again if it's a magnesium insufficiency issue. So if you're taking a calcium supplement, you are, calcium's competing with magnesium for absorption. You're flushing your system with a lot of calcium. Magnesium's insufficient, calcium's high. We know that, lower
Mm,
magnesium tends to cause cardiovascular issues. And so I'm wondering if it's more of a magnesium insufficiency issue that's under recognized and is confounding the studies
yeah,
on calcium supplementation.
that's
Given
interesting.
this competition for absorption, it's fair to say that if someone is supplementing with magnesium and calcium, it's a good idea to at least separate them
Right.
by time of the day, right? So one in the morning, one in the evening. At least you're not competing one against the other and getting the most out of each.
Right. Or, take 300 milligrams of calcium and 100 milligrams of magnesium, at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, spread it out to the day. Because again, that 600 milligrams, at least with calcium, is where your sweet spot is. Your body really doesn't absorb more than that. Again, supplements in lower doses, throughout the day would be preferable. And that helps your body, one, absorb more, your body handles it better and it gives a much less risk of toxic effects.
Hmm.
Yeah. And it sounds like if you're on the margins, or if you feel like you might be on the margins with your diet, you should probably supplement with calcium and magnesium. Is what it sounds like that would give you a margin of safety without really any particular adverse effects that we know of anyway.
Yeah, well, again, it's all about personalized nutrition, right? So,
Right.
I'm very, very into knowing your genetics. For one, um, I have, very high bone mineral density. I'm a male. I don't have a history of osteoporosis in the family. I eat relatively good. So I don't take a calcium supplement. If you are, a postmenopausal woman, who is not on hormone replacement therapy, that is small figured, Caucasian, and has a history of osteoporosis in the family. I think I'd be supplementing with a
Then you
calcium
probably
supplement,
want to.
especially if you
Right.
have a
Right. Right.
previous,
Right.
fracture.
Yeah. You just
Makes sense.
throw
Makes
all of it
sense.
on it.
Yes.
And also on the other side of the spectrum, if you're a girl, and you're developing, you're in puberty or prepubescent or just at puberty, you might consider supplement. I mean, our daughter is 14, and that's something that we try and get her to do, is take a calcium supplement, because
Right.
it just adds to it, right? It adds that deposit in the bank account, as you say.
Yeah, and in fact, our data back from, gosh, this has been since 2010, I think 2010, 2011, when we published 14 to 18-year-old girls are the most likely group in the US not to meet their calcium requirements. So
Yeah.
it's actually quite funny. The people who supplement are actually the ones that probably don't need it.
Right.
The people who supplement are the healthy, rich white women that shop at Whole Foods. And the ones who don't take the calcium supplement are the teenage girls and the postmenopausal women,
Right.
lower income populations that for some reason, one reason or another, don't take the supplement. So it's a real public burden.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. It's a great point.
Yeah.
Can we pivot? Pivot? Pivot. Okay. What are flavanols? Why are they important, and how should we get them?
Well, flavanols, also known as flavandriols, are a group of flavonoid compounds, and there are many flavonoids present in plants. I believe it's over 8,000 have been identified to date. Flavandriols or flavanols are one group, one of six groups of flavonoids that we consume in the diet. The top source is tea, green or black. Um, and most tea consumers have 10 times 20 times the intake of flavandriols from the diet compared to those who don't consume tea. Why are
Yeah.
they important?
I'm amazed, by the way, at how much is in green tea in particular, right? It's just looks through the roof.
Right. So black and green tea have, I believe it's somewhere in between 250 and 300 milligrams per 8 ounce cup. Um, obviously that's going to differ between products, how long you steep the tea. If it's, tea from a food service, it might just be artificially flavored brown water. Flavors. So, but if you're talking about like your Lipton tea or something, it's usually between 250 and 300 milligrams per 8 ounce if steep your tea, according to the directions in hot water. Um, so, why are they important? Uh, Cardiometabolic health. So, one, they've been shown to increase what's called flow mediated dilation. So, you can think of your arteries as kind of like a rubber band. And so, smoking increases, makes your veins dilate. So, like real stretch and then like they crash together. And that's when you crave another cigarette, right? Fruits and vegetables that contain these flavonoid compounds, particularly flavandriols, makes them open up and dilate to just the right circumference. And that increases healthy blood flow um, and really helps your vascular system, right? Because circulating blood helps you remove, different types of metabolic end products and waste products from the body, helps get oxygen to your cells. Um, they've been shown to modulate inflammation. They've been shown to help optimize your cholesterol levels and decrease blood pressure, particularly in those who have elevated blood pressure and elevated cholesterol levels. They've also been thought to uh, help regulate blood sugar dynamics, so insulin, blood glucose level, and in particular, they increase insulin sensitivity. So that's how sensitive your cells are to insulin. So when you see in type 2 diabetics, um, people have to have more insulin because their cells aren't sensitive enough to it. They become desensitized. And flavanols have been shown to help increase that sensitivity. So I say one of the easiest things you can do is have a cup or two of unsweet tea per day. I try to do that every day. Um, and that really, I was honored to be part of the first expert panel that made recommendations for flavanols. It's the first time a scientific panel has made intake recommendations for a non-classic nutrient like vitamin C or
Mm.
magnesium. And so we made recommendations that healthy adults should have 400 to 600 milligrams of flavanols daily for prevention of cardiometabolic diseases.
Have there been any clinical trials to see, like any prospective studies to look at, or it's too soon, or it's too hard? I can, all of these are so difficult in with
Yeah,
nutritional things, but has anyone looked at that?
yes. So actually, our panel that made this 400 to 600 milligram per day recommendation, we did that based upon a systematic review that was provided to us that assessed data from over 150 randomized control trials and 15 prospective cohort studies.
Oh,
We
wow, it's very
also
data.
Right. We also heavily took into consideration the Cosmos study, which was a large 20,000 person randomized control trial that supplemented individuals with flavanols from cocoa. The other good source of flavanols is cocoa powder or dark chocolate, not the white or milk chocolate, but dark chocolate or just plain cocoa powder. So there's been a considerable amount of evidence that shows the cocoa flavanols have a lot of beneficial vascular effects. Now, are all flavanols equal? Not necessarily. We grouped our recommendations based upon, the entire subclass. But, I would beware if you are drinking tea, not to run out and take the highest dose of a green tea supplement that you can find on the market. One, those can contain a lot of caffeine, which for most people is fine unless you have, a heart, issue. But two, the galated flavanols that you see in green tea, particularly in concentrated green tea extracts and supplements, have a much lower toxicity from supplements than they do food. We didn't really find effects if you were consuming lots of green tea, but individuals who were taking really mega dose green tea supplements, they were showing some toxic effects on the liver. So caution with supplementation. Now, the cocoa flavanols don't seem to have any toxic effects at
Hmm.
higher levels, at least in the studies that we reviewed. But the green tea ones could potentially. And it was, I believe, the dose was around 300 milligrams that could start to show hepatotoxicity with green tea supplements. But that wasn't apparent with consuming green tea. So again, one of the reasons we do food first is because the risk of toxicity for some of these compounds is higher in supplements, and just because it's natural doesn't necessarily mean that it's safe.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so, and also, if you're drinking green tea, you're probably consuming food as well. I mean, I think all of us have went and had a large, black tea or something in the morning on an empty stomach and had that little, queasy feeling for a minute. And that's from the flavonols. So again, everything with food and in moderation and don't over supplement.
What about with flavonoids and given the vascular effects of flavonoids, what about athletic performance and flavonoids? Has that been looked at?
There are some smaller studies that have looked at that athletic performance. Again, so most of the studies have looked at recovery from exercise-induced inflammation. So when we exercise, we naturally cause exercise-induced inflammation, and our body takes us back down after we're finished with that. And so flavonoids in general have been shown to help with that recovery from exercise induced inflammation. Again, flavonoids, very high antioxidant potential. Not only do they act as antioxidants, but they regulate a number of different enzymes in the body that are important for cardiometabolic health. Which again contributes. If you've got a better cardiovascular system, you're probably able to perform better athletically. So, uh, I'd say the evidence is emerging and it's out there, but as far as taking a cocoa or green tea extract supplement or drinking a cup of green tea, are you going to run faster? I think the,
Right.
the we're
Maybe
still.
from the caffeine. Maybe the caffeine a smidge, but yeah, no.
Well, people often think about, these hard outcomes. If I drink a cup of tea, can I run faster or swim faster or lift more weight? But it's really not about that. It's, I think of our mitochondria in our cells as like a busy kitchen in a restaurant. And if you get too busy and as you age, you start building up a lot of plates that are getting sent back and your mitochondria start building up. There's several like antioxidants like flavonoids that can help clear those plates out of the kitchen and kind of keep those mitochondria functioning properly in the long run. And so, does that help with athletic performance? Probably, but it also helps with healthy aging and being able to recover more optimally from that athletic performance. And that matters in the long run.
That's a great analogy. There was, speaking of that analogy, I think I read something that you wrote about urolithin A in relation to the mitochondria. Is that right? Because I that was something that
Yeah.
um that I had not run across before, and I wanted to ask you about it anyway. Is this does that tie into what you're talking about?
Yeah, the urolithins are a really interesting set of compounds. Urolithins are microbial metabolites from pomegranate elagitannins. So if you consume pomegranates or other foods that are rich in elagitannins, um, certain individuals have a microbiome that will ferment those elagitannins and produce urolithins. And urolithin A is one of particular biological interest. Now, only about a third of the population has the microbiome that will produce
Mm.
urolithins. So there's a new company called Amazentis that is affiliated with Nestle that has done a lot of clinical research in this area and, looked at, mitochondrial aging and, the real hallmarks of aging, kind of what I discussed, previously with the mitochondria, but also with DNA oxidation and, different aspects of muscle function in older adults because mitochondrial function decreases, those plates build up, and then you start to see the muscles not work as right. And so they've done a lot of, biopsies of those skeletal muscle tissues and looked
Mm.
at the mitochondria and if urolithins can really improve that. And they're showing very promising effects. Again, small clinical trials, but some really, really expensive novel studies that this group has funded. The issue with supplementation is that it's relatively expensive. It's relatively expensive to supplement with this, but I've seen certain NFL teams start to incorporate these supplements into their regimen.
And
There's
and
a
the
number.
supplement would be of urolithin A specifically.
Supplement of urolithin A, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And so it's just getting available in the US within the last year or so.
Oh,
It's relatively expensive to make. So I believe it's like $50 or so for a month's supply. So it's relatively expensive to purchase. But definitely the science is getting there.
interesting.
Very interesting.
Is that how that pomegranate juice, the POM got for a while that they were advertising that they were cardiac healthy, and is that where that derived from?
Well, so Palm Wonderful,
Palm
back in the
wonderful.
day,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, I knew a lot of the scientists there. They actually had a lot of really good science behind their product. The problem is their marketing people went too far. So if you remember, they got in trouble for saying "defy death." Um,
Oh, is that what they got in trouble? I didn't know that. I just
which obviously isn't a clinically proven state. The regulatory issue is that in marketing, there is a loophole. It's what's commonly called puffery. So Red Bull gives you wings. Well, everybody knows that if you drink a Red Bull, you're not going to grow wings. That's
oh.
called puffery.
Okay.
And in advertising, your First Amendment rights allow for puffery. So Red Bull gives you wings it is a puffery statement that is allowed by regulation in the US.
I mean,
Palm
defy
Wonderful,
death sounds like that would be puffery.
Palm Wonderful argued that defying death was puffery. They lost that suit in court
Hmm.
because they could not. There are lots of studies that show different aspects of nutrition decrease all cause mortality, and they could not show that with their product.
Mhm.
Got
Okay.
it. That's interesting. Okay. Well, that sounds like a really exciting field of research with the urolithin, and also so I guess if you're in that third of the population with the microbiome that that transforms the pomegranate into urolithin, then you can get it from the pomegranates. But you would have to is there a company that also looks at like fecal? I guess you would have to take it from fecal smears, right? And you would have to look at the microbiome that way
Well,
uh, to see
yeah.
if they have those.
Well, so to answer your first question, could you get the level from your microbiome fermenting pomegranate elagitannins? The answer is no. The levels that have been shown to be effective are above 500 milligrams, and there's not that many elagitannins in pomegranate juice. You'd be drinking pomegranate juice for, you know, you'd be drinking pomegranate juice all day, not eating anything else.
Okay,
So you really can't get it from
but it's
foods.
really a supplement
Supplement
then.
yeah, the supplement is really necessary to show the effects. Um, and then when it comes, what was your second question?
Oh no, I was just wondering. I sort of along the same lines of companies that look at your blood and your genetics. I wondered if there are companies that are now looking at the microbiomes. We talked
Oh,
to
I
Emery Mayer, who's a microbiome specialist, and he was talking. So we went into a lot of depth about how only about 5% of the microbiomes are shared from person to person. So each person's microbiome is so individually specific. Um, it would be really interesting to get to a point where you could look at the microbiome and then give recommendations based off that. I imagine that the science isn't quite ready for prime time yet, but still, there's going to be a vanguard, and that's an exciting exciting place to think
Yeah.
about anyway.
Yeah.
right. So here's what we know about the microbiome. We do a lot of research with the microbiome. In fact, I'm doing a study in Guatemala, severely malnourished 6-month-old infants, where we're looking to see if differences in the microbiome can predict, growth stunting in young children. Um, Here's the thing to know about the microbiome. We know that a more diverse microbiome is a better microbiome. We know that certain uh, pathogenic bacteria are related to certain diseases. So, for example, Helicobacter pylori is promotes gastric cancer in the stomach. We know that people with Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis have high levels of certain enteric adhesive E. coli in their gut. But for the most part, we measure and we have some idea that there are some, good bacteria like bifidobacteria and lactobacilli in the gut. And there are others that, are not so great. And we know that the microbiome is very different in a person that is normal weight and healthy versus one that is obese and diseased. We know that certain disease states have different microbes associated with them. We know that the microbiome communicates with the rest of the body, communicates with the brain, it communicates with the bones and other tissues within the body, and can influence production of hormones and other compounds that can have signaling effects in the body. Um, and then, it goes back to your original question on artificial sweeteners. We know people who consume a lot of diet soda have certain higher levels of certain microbes. So what? We don't know. We've not linked them with any kind of health detriment or outcome. Does that mean we couldn't in the future? I mean, I think we probably would have found it by now if it was a huge detriment. Um, the microbiome research is in its infancy.
Yeah.
There's not a lot we know about it. And, and it's also to look at functionality of the microbiome is very expensive, over $1,000 a sample, to really dig down and look into the microbiome. So you've got to have some real big bucks to really do a full clinical assessment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Pivot. I'm pivoting again. Okay. If I could ask you about nutrition and the immune system, we kind of touched on it with magnesium and vitamin D, but if you were thinking like I think intuitively that we understand that a healthier diet, better immune system, but drilling down into some more specifics, if you were especially everyone's worried about viruses these days and COVID-19 and whatever else is going to come around the corner. How do we use nutrition and perhaps supplementation to create a better immune system in ourselves?
Well, so using COVID-19 as an example, I think one thing that's very universally understood is that individuals who are overweight and obese were much more prone to contracting COVID, and the severity of the disease once contracted was way higher. They were more likely to be in the ICU. In fact, that's what I was doing this morning. We are just about to publish an 8-center ICU trial where we documented nutrition practices in 8 ICU units throughout the US. We're going to look at different patterns that equate to less mortality, less length of stay, whether you were ventilated or not ventilated. Um, but we know, that very strikingly, people who are overweight and obese were more predisposed to contracting COVID, and it was more severe in those individuals. Um, why is that? Obesity is really an endocrine disruption, right? So when you become more obese, for example, you have more fat cells. Fat cells tend to produce different cytokines. Fat cells produce estrogen and other hormones. Things get out of whack. So it's almost like Nashville, Tennessee, right? It was this little quaint southern town, and then all of a sudden they started building freeways everywhere, and now everything's just like going crazy in Nashville. That's kind of what happens when you gain weight and you get to be in the overweight, obese categories. So then, you've already got higher levels of inflammation, endocrine disruption, immune dysfunction, and then COVID-19 comes around, you contract it, and then all of a sudden your body's demand for all these nutrients and nutrition goes skyrocket, and your body can't handle it. And so it sends your body into this cascade. Does nutrition matter? Absolutely. I mean, we talk about, magnesium and vitamin D and zinc and iron and calcium and some of the other nutrients that could be players. But by far, the biggest, you know, uh, predisposition to, dying from COVID-19 was being overweight and obese.
Yeah.
age had something to do with it. But again, you're seeing a progressive inflammation, with older individuals, a decreased immune function, things like that, which, a lot can be offset by having good nutrition.
Yeah. Does increasing fruits and vegetables in particular, would that in a person that doesn't have obesity, that's just that's relatively normal body weight, can they really amp up their immune system with their diet, or is that not really? Just think about being healthy overall, but otherwise the immune system is not going to be that affected by it.
Yeah, I mean, fruits and vegetables, one, they have, a ton of vitamins and minerals that we know help prevent, immune dysfunction and help build up the immune system. They also help prevent inflammation. But it also, again, going back to the flavanols, the flavonoids, and other, bioactive compounds that have strong effects. Your body's kind of in tandem. It's not just your immune system or your vascular system. They all kind of work together. So, if you've got a lot of inflammation over here, you've got a lot of like immune issues over here, you're going to see, a buildup of plaque in the arteries, heart disease, or elevated blood pressure that, you know, starts
Yeah.
extending to the brain and cognitive function, the kidneys. I mean, it's all in tandem.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
May I pivot?
Pivot again.
This actually wasn't on my long list of questions, but when you talked about green tea, it made me think of it. What are your thoughts about coffee? Does coffee have any benefits? It seems like as a proud coffee addict, I feel like there's a lot of studies that are done that I always think are trying to impugn coffee, and coffee always seems to come out smelling like roses, whether it's reducing the risk of Parkinson's or depression. But I'm sure you're more informed on this than I am. So can I ask you to reinforce my love of coffee?
Yeah. So, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, especially with, different, cognitive related dysfunctions later in life, having a cup or two of unsweet black coffee per day, or maybe just with milk, is a good option. Now, coffee is kind of a neat, uh, you know, I don't know if you call it a confound or what you call it. It's very similar to tea in that all of us nutrition food scientists, we get up and we say, drink unsweet tea or drink, you know, uh, unsweet coffee that doesn't have a lot of cream in it and stuff like that. But in the studies, we don't really discriminate between that. I mean, if you look at the population, we look at coffee intake, we don't really know whether they put sugar in it or not. So the effects that we see are just in general, a smaller portion of the population drinks black coffee than what they get when they go to Starbucks or, the coffee shop where you juice it up with all your vanilla flavors and syrups and other
Sure.
stuff.
Yeah.
But you still see effects. So to me, when it comes to like the flavanols and tea, or when it comes to the effects in coffee, the benefits are probably greater than what we're showing in clinical studies because people aren't across the board consuming unsweet tea or black coffee.
That's a great point. I love it.
This has been a great
this
conversation
is
for
the
Grant.
this is the
You have the diet soda
yeah.
and coffee
Yeah.
endorsements from you. What
That's
about
off my
kind of
intake.
on the tail end of coffee? What about hydration? And there's been a lot of conversation about coffee and dehydrating effects of coffee, and how do you complement that with the amount of hydration? What's your take on that?
Well, I mean, oh gosh, where you really see hydration as being an issue is in elderly individuals that are institutionalized, like in nursing homes and assisted living facilities, where they might not have access to as many fluids. If you're talking about you or me, that has, a cup of coffee in the morning, a diet soda, in the afternoon, um, maybe you have an energy drink every now and then. Um, I don't know if I see that as being a real concern. I mean, most of us,
Yeah.
if you're thirsty, that means you're about a cup deficient in water. So most of us, if we have a cup of coffee and it makes us urinate, and then we're thirsty an hour later, we just go get another beverage or,
Right.
something.
Yeah.
So not a huge issue in my mind, except, in that older institutionalized population.
Is there a target amount of fluid that you think people should seek? Because there used to be the recommendations of 8 glasses of water, and then that seemed to hit on some rocky times. And where do things stand now?
Yeah, the 8 glasses of water thing is funny. It's 8 glasses of water is actually very similar to the negative 2.5 T score that we use to define osteoporosis. It really
Oh,
is not based on anything science. It was a bunch of old white drunk guys in the 1960s that just met and said, "We think 8 glasses of water a day. Let's go to happy hour." And that's just kind of where it came from and what it's been ever since then. There's not really a recommendation around it currently. And, obviously if you're more muscular, you need more water. Men tend to need more than women. Like,
yeah.
depends on your caffeine intake, your sodium intake, your electrolyte intake. It
Right.
differs from person to person. There's not any universal recommendation. I would say, the more
Can you
water
can you
you drink per day is probably good.
can you basically look at your urine and say, look, if it's mostly clear, then you're probably good? Is that a safe, sort of napkin kind of way to calculate it?
Yeah, I mean, usually, after you eat certain foods, your urine can turn a different color. That's usually indicative of B vitamins and vitamin C. I mean, look, I take a multivitamin every day and I also take extra vitamin C. So I've always got kind of yellow urine from that. So if you're taking supplements, it's not, which most of the population is, it's not necessarily the best indicator. Um, you know, I,
Fair.
I
Yeah.
think the issue is try to stay hydrated and, you know,
I think generally the color of the urine hasn't been correlated to the osmolality of the urine itself.
Is that right?
Yeah, yeah,
Ah,
hasn't been
okay.
not a good measure
yeah.
of
Okay.
hydration status.
Well, I think if you're urinating a couple times a day or a few times a day, that's indicative of good hydration status.
Yeah.
Um, and it also helps, clean everything out, prevents kidney stones, things like that.
Yeah. I like that we can throw out the 8 glasses of water a day. I actually assumed that there was some science behind it. I didn't realize it was, you know,
I
like
would
people.
have to go back and look. I've not done any research in that area, but
No,
I know
but
those, long-standing 8 glasses of water a day thing were just
yeah,
evidence it was baseless.
that's hilarious. Yeah, it's it's good to know. It's refreshing to find out where the dogma ends and then science begins, right? Because sometimes there's something that's been there for so long, we all just keep repeating it,
Right,
and then you look under the hood and you say, "Well, there's no reason for that. Why are we saying that?"
right.
Yeah, that's great. Um, I know we got to let him go soon.
Yeah, yeah, we've occupied your time. Uh,
Can I ask one more?
Yep.
Um, I heard you talking about choline, and I found it so interesting. I think you were on Dr. Oz talking about it, right? I can't remember the venue you were in, but it was something that I hadn't heard before. And you also said something I'll just mention. You were talking to someone about how doctors don't get a lot of education in nutrition. And as two doctors sitting here, yeah, 100%. And so
Agreed.
we end up having to self-educate, after medical school, after sometimes after residency and fellowship, so it's really exciting when we run across someone like you, and when you say things that we hadn't heard about before, it's like, oh, I want to know more. So along those lines, choline, what is it and why is that important?
Oh gosh. Choline is, I guess, the most recent love of my life for about the last 10 years. It's what I really focused in my research on. Choline is an essential nutrient that you probably haven't heard of, but you are probably not getting enough of. We showed about 10 years ago that 90% of Americans, including 92% of pregnant women, don't get enough choline from the diet. Choline is uh, a nutrient that is found predominantly in egg yolks and animal derived foods, seafood, and well, eggs and secondarily seafood tend to drive choline intakes in the US. Um, Choline is involved in a number of different biological functions. Deficiency in choline results in non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So fat accumulation in the liver that can begin to cause cirrhosis over time, which is actually pretty prevalent in the US. And,
It's been on the rise, right?
yeah, and with 90% of us not having enough choline, that could be, one of the issues. Um, the other thing that choline is involved with is muscle function. And you see individuals who, particularly athletes who work out um, uh, that aren't adequate in choline, they have more muscle breakdown. And you see that with aging as well. Choline is also really important because it is the precursor to acetylcholine, which is an important neurotransmitter in the body. Actually, we're coming out with some research in early 2024 that shows individuals that have higher choline intakes have a much lower risk of developing Alzheimer's disease later in life. There are over 50 rodent models that show supplementation of choline early in life can prevent dementia related conditions like Alzheimer's later in life. We know that the first 1,000 days is really important when it comes to choline. When women are pregnant, estrogen levels increase by almost 60 times in some women. And that's why they get so crazy during pregnancy, right? But estrogen drives choline production in the body. So your body can produce small amounts of choline, but not enough to meet the requirements. So it is an essential nutrient in that you have to get it from the diet. However, pregnant women tend to produce lots more choline because it's so critical for the baby. And then there are about 44% of women that have genetic mutations that prevent them from either producing enough or utilizing the choline that they do produce in the body. So lots of genetic mutations that are involved in whether choline gets shuttled to the liver or it gets turned into acetylcholine in the brain. Choline is also very important in cell membranes and how our cells communicate with one another. So again, really important for cognition and cognitive development in children. There's a study from Cornell University, is a very small clinical trial of 20, 25 infants where the mothers were supplemented, half were supplemented with the adequate intake or the recommended intake of choline. And then the other half were supplemented with double the recommended intake of choline. And at age 1, 3, and then now 7 years of age, those children have better cognition. The ones that were on double the dose of choline versus just the recommended intake. So again, recommendations are 25 plus years old, need to be reevaluated by the National Academy of Medicine. Some really neat stuff coming out there on choline. And actually, we're looking at choline and child development and cognition in Guatemala in malnourished populations to see if, an egg a day can potentially affect cognitive development in those kids that are really at risk. So we've got a lot of stuff in the pipeline,
really
choline coming.
I feel like choline is going to be something we're going to be hearing a lot about in the future as well.
Yeah, the issue with choline is it's like calcium. You can't just put it in a multivitamin because it's bulky, right? So it has to be its own pill. And I've actually very much advocated for all pregnant women to take a choline supplement because of its effects on brain development in young infants.
Wow. Sorry, kids. I've got 3 kids. It's a little late for them, but that's really exciting. And yeah, that's really cool. Taylor, you've been so generous with your time. We really appreciate it. This is really been a lot of fun. And I have about 20 more questions for you, but maybe we can have you back sometime and pick your brain some more.
That'd be great.
Friends, thank you for your attention. We hope you've enjoyed the conversation. If you find value, Please remember to hit the like button to help us with our YouTube algorithm. Consider subscribing to the channel and turn on the notifications so you can stay up to date with everything going on with the channel. And please leave us a comment, let us know what you thought about the show and also what you'd like to hear about in the future.